Before we get started, please like and subscribe. Let me know where you're watching from, and you can support the channel by clicking thanks or joining. I was 7 years old when I wrote the letter that ruined Christmas forever. At the time, I still believed in Santa Claus, the way children are supposed to believe in him, without questions, without doubt, without fear. My mother kept a small wooden mailbox on the kitchen counter every December. It was painted red and green with faded gold letters that said, "Letters to Santa." Every night before Christmas Eve, she told me to place my letter inside and promised that Santa would find it somehow. Our house sat at the edge of Pine Hollow, a quiet town buried under snow for most of winter. The streets were narrow, the houses old and close together, as if they were afraid of the cold themselves. Christmas lights flickered from every porch, but Pine Hollow always felt darker than other places I had been. The woods surrounding the town pressed in too closely, and the wind made strange sounds at night. That year, I remember the cold being worse than usual, the kind of cold that crept through the walls and settled in your bones. I sat at the kitchen table with a pencil in my hand while my mother stirred soup on the stove. The window above the sink rattled softly with the wind. "Dear Santa," I wrote carefully, forming each letter the way my teacher had taught me. I told him I had been good, that I helped my mom with chores, that I did not fight with the other kids at school even when they teased me. I asked for a red fire truck and a pair of gloves because my hands were always cold. Then something strange happened. My pencil stopped moving. Not because I was done, but because I felt a pressure in my chest, a tightness that made it hard to breathe. I stared at the paper, and without thinking, I wrote a sentence I had never planned. "Please do not let me die like the man in the snow." As soon as the words were written, my heart began to race. I did not know why I had written that. I had never seen a man dead in the snow. I tried to erase it, but the pencil marks pressed too deeply into the paper. The words stayed faint but readable like a scar. My mother turned and asked if I was finished. I nodded quickly, folded the letter, and slid it into the wooden mailbox before I could change my mind. That night I dreamed of snow falling endlessly. In the dream, I was standing at the edge of the woods, watching someone lying face down in the white ground. I could not see his face, but I knew somehow that it was me. When I woke up, my sheets were soaked with sweat and my window was frosted over from the inside. On Christmas morning, the letter was gone. The mailbox sat empty on the counter, its little door hanging open. My mother smiled and said, "Santa must have come early." I tried to smile back, but a deep unease settled in my stomach. I did not tell her about the strange sentence I had written. Years passed. Childhood faded. Santa became a story, then a joke, then a memory I rarely thought about. Pine Hollow stayed the same though. People moved away, houses fell into disrepair, winters grew harsher. When I was 12, a man named Robert Keller was found dead in the woods just outside town. He had frozen overnight after his truck slid off the road. The news spread quickly. Everyone talked about it in hushed voices. I listened from the stairs as my mother whispered to a neighbor about how they found him face down in the snow. That night I remembered the letter. The words came back to me with horrifying clarity. "Do not let me die like the man in the snow." I tried to tell myself it was coincidence, just a childish sentence written without thought. But every Christmas after that, strange things began to happen. Letters started appearing in our mailbox. Not bills, not advertisements, but envelopes with my name written on them in neat red ink. There was no return address. Inside each envelope was a single sentence, written on thick white paper. The first one arrived when I was 16. "You will survive the ice, but not the silence." I laughed it off, showed it to my friends at school. They joked that someone was playing a prank, but I did not laugh that night, because the handwriting was the same as the letter I had written to Santa years ago. Every Christmas, the letters continued, each one more specific, more disturbing. "You will hear the bells, but no one will come. You will bleed where the lights still glow. You will beg, but the snow will not listen." I tried to ignore them. I moved away for college. I built a life far from Pine Hollow, but no matter where I went, the letters found me every December. Until this year. This year, the envelope was heavier. Inside was not a sentence, but a full letter. And at the top, in familiar red ink, were the words that made my blood run cold. "Dear me, this is how you die." I did not sleep after reading the letter. The words, "Dear me, this is how you die," stayed burned into my mind long after I folded the paper and shoved it back into the envelope. I sat at my kitchen table until dawn, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the distant howl of winter wind between apartment buildings. Every sound felt amplified, as if the world itself was holding its breath. I told myself it was a prank. Someone had followed me, someone from Pine Hollow, maybe someone who knew about the old letters and wanted to scare me. But deep down I knew the truth. The handwriting was not just similar, it was identical. Every curve, every pressure mark, every slight tilt of each letter matched the way my 7-year-old hand had moved across paper decades ago. By morning, the snow had started to fall. I stood by the window watching thick white flakes drift down in lazy spirals. Christmas Eve, of all days, my phone buzzed with messages from coworkers wishing me happy holidays. I ignored them. I could not shake the feeling that something had already been set in motion. The letter did not tell me when I would die, only how. That scared me more than anything. I called my mother for the first time in months. She answered on the third ring, her voice warm but tired. "Are you coming home this year?" she asked. I hesitated. Pine Hollow was the last place I wanted to be, but a strange pull tugged at me the same way it always did in December. "I do not know," I said. "I just wanted to hear your voice." She laughed softly. "You sound like a scared kid again." I almost told her everything. The letters, the sentence, the fear gnawing at my chest. But I stopped myself. How could I explain something I barely understood myself? That night, another envelope appeared under my door. No knock, No footsteps, just there when I returned from taking out the trash. This one was thinner. Inside was a single page filled from top to bottom with neat red handwriting. You tried to leave. You tried to forget, but the story always returns to where it began. At the bottom was a date, December 24. Tonight, my hands shook so badly I dropped the paper. The snow outside was falling harder now, the streetlights casting long, distorted shadows across the ground. I felt watched, not by someone in the room, but by something that knew me intimately, something patient. I packed a bag without thinking. I do not know why I decided to go back to Pine Hollow. Maybe part of me believed that facing it head-on was safer than waiting, or maybe the letter was right. Maybe the story always returned to where it began. The drive took 6 hours. The highway slowly emptied as I moved farther north. Radio stations faded into static. Snow piled higher along the shoulders of the road. By the time I reached the town limits, darkness had already fallen. Pine Hollow looked frozen in time. The same faded welcome sign, the same crooked lamppost near Main Street, the same woods looming just beyond the last row of houses. Christmas lights still decorated many homes, but fewer windows glowed from within. I parked in front of my childhood house. The porch light flickered weakly. My mother opened the door before I could knock. "You made it," she said, pulling me into a hug. "You are freezing." Inside, everything smelled the same. Pine cleaner and old wood and something faintly sweet. The wooden mailbox still sat on the kitchen counter. I stared at it longer than I meant to. She followed my gaze. "I never had the heart to throw that thing away," she said. "Tradition, I guess." That night I slept in my old room. The bed creaked when I lay down. Snow tapped softly against the window. I dreamed of red ink dripping across white paper, forming words that rearranged themselves, no matter how hard I tried to read them. I woke to a sound just after midnight, the mailbox door creaking open. I froze, listening. Slow footsteps moved across the kitchen floor. Not my mother's. Too light, too careful. I got out of bed and opened my door inch by inch. The kitchen light was on. Someone stood at the counter, hunched over the mailbox. A small figure wearing a red coat trimmed with white fur. For one impossible moment, I thought of Santa. Then the figure turned. Its face was wrong, too smooth, too pale, like a mask stretched over something hollow. Its eyes were dark pits reflecting the kitchen light. It held a pen and it was writing my name. I screamed. The light went out. When my mother rushed in moments later, the kitchen was empty. The mailbox sat closed. No footprints marked the floor. No sign that anyone had been there. But inside the mailbox was a fresh letter. "Dear me, step 1 has begun." I did not believe what I saw that night. But belief stopped mattering the moment the letter appeared in the mailbox. "Dear me, step 1 has begun." Those 4 words felt heavier than any threat I had ever received. They did not scream. They did not explain. They simply existed with quiet certainty, as if the future had already been written, and I was only now being allowed to read it. My mother insisted it had to be stress, a nightmare. She brewed chamomile tea and sat with me at the kitchen table while the snow continued to fall outside. She checked the locks twice and searched the house from attic to basement. Nothing was missing. Nothing was disturbed. Except me, I did not sleep. I watched the mailbox from the hallway chair until dawn. When morning finally came, the house felt smaller, as if the walls had crept closer during the night. Pine Hollow was silent under fresh snow. No tire tracks, no footprints, just smooth, untouched white stretching toward the woods. I opened the mailbox again. Empty. That should have relieved me. Instead, it filled me with dread. The mailbox was not done with me. It was only waiting. Over breakfast, I asked my mother about the winter Robert Keller died. She stiffened immediately. "Why bring that up?" she asked quietly. I told her I remembered it from childhood. The man in the woods, the way everyone whispered about it. She stared into her coffee for a long moment before speaking. People said he got lost. That was not true. Robert knew those woods better than anyone. He used to hunt out there every winter. He knew every path, every marker. He knew how to survive. Then how did he die, I asked. She swallowed. He followed instructions. The words sent a chill through me. What instructions? She hesitated. The night he died, he told his wife he had received a letter, said it told him where to go, that if he followed it, something important would happen. We all thought he was joking or drunk. Her hands trembled slightly as she set down her mug. They found him face down, like he had knelt first, like he was praying. My chest tightened. I thought of my own letter, of the sentence I had written as a child without understanding why. That afternoon I went to the Pine Hollow Library. The building was old and smelled of dust and pine cleaner. Mrs. Caldwell still worked the front desk, her hair thinner now, but her eyes just as sharp. "You are Emily Walker's boy," she said, smiling faintly. "I remember your letters." The word letters made my stomach drop. "You remember what letters?" I asked. She pointed to a locked filing cabinet behind her desk. "The town keeps things," she said. "Old things, things people forget." She hesitated only a second before unlocking it. Inside were dozens of envelopes, all red, all addressed in careful, familiar handwriting. Some were decades old. The paper yellowed with age. Others looked new. "What are these?" I whispered. "Christmas letters," she said. Letters people claimed to receive or claimed to send. Most folks try to forget them. The town does not. I flipped through them, my hands shaking. Names I recognized. Dates, notes scribbled by officials. Missing, found deceased, cause exposure, cause unknown. At the bottom of the drawer, I saw one envelope smaller than the rest. My name was on it. The date read December 24th from the year I was 7. I pulled it out slowly. Inside was my childhood letter to Santa, including the sentence I had tried to erase. "Please do not let me die like the man in the snow." My breath came in short, shallow bursts. Mrs. Caldwell watched me with something like pity. "It always starts young," she said. "Fear makes the ink listen." "What listens?" I asked. She shook her head. "No one knows, only that it answers, and it never forgets." That night, the second letter arrived. It appeared in the mailbox while my mother and I ate dinner. We heard the wooden door creak open by itself. I opened it with shaking hands. "Dear me, step 2 requires obedience." My phone buzzed at the same moment. A message from an unknown number. "Go to the old bell tower at midnight. Come alone." I wanted to run. I wanted to burn every letter and leave Pine Hollow forever. But something deeper than fear pulled me forward. the same pull that had guided Robert Keller into the woods. At midnight, the town was frozen and silent. Snow fell lightly, dusting the road as I walked toward the church. The bell tower loomed above me, dark against the sky. The door was unlocked. Inside, the air smelled of old stone and rust. A single lantern sat on the floor, its flame flickering. Another letter waited beside it. "Dear me, if you want to live, climb." I looked up. The ladder disappeared into darkness, and above me, the bells began to move. The ladder creaked under my weight as I placed my foot on the first rung. The bells above me were massive shapes lost in darkness, but I could feel their presence like a pressure in the air. Each slow movement sent a dull vibration through the stone walls and into my bones. I told myself I could still leave. I could turn around, walk back into the snow, and never look at another letter again. But the word climb echoed in my mind with terrifying authority. I ascended rung by rung, my hands slick with sweat despite the cold. The lantern below cast a weak circle of light that shrank with every step upward. Shadows twisted along the walls, forming shapes that looked almost like reaching hands. Halfway up the ladder, the bells stopped moving. The sudden silence was worse than the noise. It felt deliberate, like something was waiting to see if I would continue. I froze, gripping the ladder until my fingers ached. Then my phone vibrated. Another message from the unknown number. "Do not stop now. Stopping is how you fall." My throat tightened. I forced myself upward until my head emerged into the narrow platform beneath the bells. The air was colder here, thick with the smell of rust and old dust. The bells loomed inches away, their surfaces scarred and darkened by age. Hanging from the largest bell was a red envelope. I reached for it with trembling hands. As soon as I touched it, the bell above me swayed gently, as if responding to my presence. I pulled the envelope free and opened it. "Dear me, Step 2, complete. Step 3 requires sacrifice." Before I could process the words, the bells rang. Not a joyful Christmas peal, but a violent, deafening clang that shattered the silence of Pine Hollow. The sound tore through my head, sending pain down my spine. I lost my balance and barely managed to cling to the ladder as the bell swung inches from my face. When the ringing stopped, I was alone again. I descended slowly, every muscle shaking. By the time my feet hit the church floor, my legs nearly gave out. I stumbled outside into the snow, gasping for air. Lights flickered on in nearby houses. Curtains shifted. I knew people had heard the bells. I knew questions would come. I ran back at my mother's house. I locked myself in my old bedroom and sat on the floor until dawn. The letters lay spread out in front of me like pieces of a puzzle I could not solve. Step 1 has begun. Step 2 requires obedience. Step 3 requires sacrifice. What sacrifice? Morning brought no answers. My mother avoided my eyes over breakfast. She had heard the bells. Everyone had. By midday, day, the town buzzed with uneasy energy. Rumors spread quickly. Some said vandals rang the bells. Others whispered about old traditions best left alone. I returned to the library, desperate for answers. Mrs. Caldwell was waiting for me. "I knew you would climb," she said quietly. "You knew I would ask." She nodded. "They always climb. The letters are not commands. They are invitations. The choice is real, but the consequences are not." I told her about the sacrifice. Her face paled. "The third step is the hardest," she said. "It always takes something precious, something you think you cannot live without." "Has anyone survived?" I asked. She hesitated too long. "Some delayed it," she said finally. "Some passed it on." "Passed it on how?" She opened another drawer and slid a thin folder toward me. Inside were photographs, newspaper clippings, and notes. Parents, children, friends. Every survivor had one thing in common. They wrote a letter. That afternoon, the next message arrived. "Choose someone you love. Write their name. Seal it with belief." I felt sick. I thought of my mother alone in this house, clinging to traditions and memories. I thought of friends long gone. I thought of myself at 7 years old, writing without understanding. That night I sat at the kitchen table again. The wooden mailbox waited. I held the pen in my hand, staring at the blank paper. My reflection in the dark window looked older than it should have. Eyes hollowed by fear. If I wrote a name, I would live. If I refused, I knew what awaited me. The house was silent, except for the ticking clock. Snow fell softly outside, burying Pine Hollow deeper under white. I wrote one word, my own name. The mailbox door creaked open by itself. Somewhere in the distance, bells began to ring again. I expected something immediate to happen the moment I wrote my own name. A scream, a shadow, the bells tearing loose from the tower and crashing down on the house. Instead, there was only silence. Thick, heavy silence that pressed against my ears until I could hear my own heartbeat. The mailbox closed itself with a soft wooden click. I waited for relief to come. It never did. Sleep found me just before dawn, not because I was calm, but because my body finally gave out. When I woke, the house felt wrong. Too quiet. The ticking clock in the hallway had stopped. My phone showed no signal. I found my mother sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the wooden mailbox. She did not turn when I spoke her name. "Mom!" She blinked slowly as if waking from a dream. Her eyes looked distant, unfocused. "Did you hear the bells last night?" she asked. "Yes," I said carefully. She nodded. "They rang for a long time. I thought they were for someone else." Something in her tone made my stomach drop. "What do you mean, someone else?" She finally looked at me. For a brief second, recognition flickered across her face. Then it faded. "Do you live here?" she asked. The room seemed to tilt. "Yes, Mom, it's me." She frowned, studying me, as if trying to remember a word she had forgotten. I watched confusion replace warmth piece by piece. "I think I used to have a son," she said slowly. My breath caught in my throat. The sacrifice had been taken, not her life. Me. By noon, the town doctor confirmed what I already knew. No stroke, no injury, just memory loss. Severe and sudden. She remembered her childhood, her parents, her job at the school. She did not remember me. Word spread quickly. Pine Hollow had always fed on quiet tragedies. People brought casseroles and pity and questions they did not ask out loud. Mrs. Caldwell came by in the afternoon. "You chose yourself," she said gently. "I thought it meant I would die." "Sometimes death is not the worst outcome," she replied. That evening, the next letter arrived. "Dear me, you are learning. Step 4 will be public." Public? The word echoed in my mind long after I folded the letter. That night, the town gathered in the square. No one announced it. No one invited anyone. People simply came, drawn by instinct, by habit, by something older than logic. Snow fell steadily, coating the Christmas decorations in white. The tree lights glowed softly, casting long shadows. The church bells loomed above, silent, now waiting. I stood at the edge of the crowd, unseen. Then the bells rang once. A hush fell. A figure stepped forward from the church doors, carrying a stack of red envelopes. One by one, names were read aloud. People stepped forward, hands shaking to receive their letters. Gasps, whispers, tears. I recognized some of the names. Others were strangers, but every face showed the same dawning terror as they read. My name was called last. The envelope was heavier than the others. Inside was a single sentence. "Dear me, tomorrow you will understand why you were spared." The bells rang again, signaling the end. People dispersed quickly, clutching their letters like wounds. Snow swallowed their footsteps. I was left alone in the square, staring up at the tower. Behind me, a familiar voice whispered, "You cannot escape the ending." I turned. The figure from the tower stood inches away. Its face smooth, pale, unfinished. It wore the red coat again, now stained with dark ink. "You wrote first," it said. "That is why you are last." "What do you want?" I demanded. It tilted its head. Completion. As it stepped back into the shadows, I knew the truth with terrible clarity. The letters were not warnings. They were rehearsals. And Christmas Eve was almost over. Morning came without warmth. Christmas Day arrived, wrapped in gray light and falling snow. Pine Hollow looked peaceful from the outside, as if nothing terrible had happened the night before. But peace in this town was always a lie stretched thin over something rotten. I woke to my mother humming softly in the kitchen. For a brief, hopeful second, I thought everything had reset, that the sacrifice had been undone. I followed the sound down the hallway, holding my breath. She stood at the stove stirring oatmeal. Her posture was relaxed, her movements familiar. She turned and smiled politely. "Good morning," she said. "You must be staying at the neighbor's house. Can I help you?" The words cut deeper than anger ever could. I nodded numbly and stepped back. She returned to her humming, already forgetting me again. I realized then that the letters did not simply take memories, they rewrote reality. In her world, I had never existed. Outside, the town was waking. Children dragged sleds across sidewalks. Families carried wrapped gifts to cars. Laughter drifted through the cold air, and beneath it all ran a quiet current of dread. Every person who had received a letter the night before knew the truth. Christmas was not over. It had only begun. I walked through town, watching faces. Some people avoided eye contact. Others stared openly at me as if trying to place where they knew me from. I wondered how many of them had chosen sacrifice, how many had chosen delay, how many had chosen to pass the burden forward. At the edge of the square, Mrs. Caldwell waited for me. "You survived the public step," she said. "That means the story wants you awake. Awake for what I asked, for the origin." She led me beyond the square, past the last row of houses toward the woods. Snow muffled our footsteps. The trees loomed closer with every step, their branches heavy with white. "There is a place," she said, "older than the town, older than the church. People used to leave offerings there long before letters existed." We reached a clearing where the snow was thinner, as if the ground itself refused to hold it. At the center stood a stone slab carved with faded symbols and children handprints pressed into the surface. "This is where belief settles," she said, "where fear takes shape." I felt it immediately, the same pressure I had felt as a child writing my letter, the same pull that guided Robert Keller into the woods. "So what is it?" I whispered. Mrs. Caldwell looked tired, not old but worn thin by generations of watching. "It is not Santa," she said. "It never was. It is the idea of Santa. Judgment, reward, punishment, a watcher who knows your secrets because you give them willingly, a god built by children, as if summoned by the thought." A red envelope lay on the stone slab. "Dear me, step 5 requires creation. Creation of what I asked." My phone buzzed. "Write the rules. Teach them young. Make them believe." I backed away, shaking my head. "No," I said. "I am done. I will not help you." Mrs. Caldwell stepped back as well, fear flickering across her face. "Then it will take without asking," she said. That afternoon, the town held Christmas dinner in the hall as it did every year. Long tables, shared food, forced smiles, tradition as shield. I sat alone at the end watching the doors. Children ran between tables, laughing, their mouths sticky with sweets. Parents watched them with tired affection. And then the letters appeared, one by one. Red envelopes materialized on empty plates. Panic rippled through the room. Chairs scraped. Someone screamed. The figure in the red coat stood at the far end of the hall, watching. It pointed at me. "You are the author," it said softly. "You began this story. Now you must continue it." The children fell silent. Every eye turned toward me. In that moment, I understood the final cruelty of the letters. They did not just predict death, they taught it. I picked up a pen, and the room held its breath. The pen felt heavier than it should have in my hand. Every eye in the hall stayed fixed on me, as if the room itself had decided I was the only thing worth watching. Children stood frozen between tables, their laughter cut short mid-breath. Parents clutched chairs, plates, sleeves, anything solid enough to remind them this was still real. The figure in the red coat did not move. It did not need to. The pressure in the air was enough. "Write it," said softly. "Write what they must believe." I looked down at the blank paper placed before me. The surface was pristine white, untouched by fear. For a moment, I imagined tearing it in half. I imagined screaming the truth, warning every parent, grabbing the children, and running into the snow. But I knew better. Belief was not force. It was invited. I began to write. I wrote about Santa watching, about how he knew when you lied, when you disobeyed, when you wished harm on others. I wrote that he rewarded honesty and punished those who strayed. I wrote that Christmas was a test, and that letters were how you proved yourself worthy. The words flowed too easily. Each sentence felt familiar, as if I was remembering something rather than inventing it. With every line, the air grew warmer, the lights brighter. The children leaned closer. When I finished, the paper was taken from my hands by unseen fingers. The figure nodded approvingly. "Good," it said. "They will teach their children. The children will teach theirs. And you." It continued, turning its hollow gaze back to me. "You will remember." The envelopes vanished from the tables. The crowd erupted into confused chatter. But the fear did not leave. It lingered like smoke, clinging to clothes and hair. That night, Pine Hollow slept uneasily. I did not go home. There was no home for me now. I walked until my feet burned from cold and exhaustion, eventually stopping at the edge of the woods near the old stone slab. The snow had stopped falling. The sky was clear, revealing a hard, glittering field of stars. I waited. Sometime near dawn, the figure appeared again, emerging soundlessly between the trees. Up close, its form seemed less solid, as if it were held together by expectation alone. "You are afraid," it said. "I am angry," I replied. It tilted its head. Anger is belief sharpened. "What happens to me?" I asked. It did not answer immediately. When it did, its voice was almost gentle. "You are the witness, the reminder. You will live long enough to see the story repeat. That is your punishment." The words settled into me like frost. Over the following days, Pine Hollow returned to routine. Decorations stayed up longer than usual. Parents reminded children to behave. Letters to Santa appeared again in homes that had not seen them in years. And every time a child picked up a pencil, I felt it. A tug, a whisper. I tried to leave town. I packed my car, drove until the trees thinned and the road straightened. At the county line, the engine died without warning. Snow drifted across the hood. When I turned the key again, the radio crackled to life. I walked back to Pine Hollow. Years passed. I stayed because I had to. I aged while the town barely did. New children were born. Old ones left and returned with families of their own. Every December, the cycle repeated quietly, efficiently. Letters came. Accidents happened. Sacrifices were made. I learned to recognize the signs, the look in a parent's eyes when a letter arrived, the way someone avoided mirrors after choosing themselves, the way grief settled when a name was written instead. Sometimes I tried to intervene. I warned people subtly, carefully. Most laughed. Some listened. None escaped. On my 40th Christmas, I received another letter. "Dear me, the ending approaches. Witnesses do not last forever." I stood in the square beneath the bells, watching snow fall, just as I had as a child. Families passed by me without recognition. To them I was part of the scenery, another fixture of Pine Hollow. The bells began to ring, and for the first time I wondered if the final step was mine alone. The letter stayed in my pocket for days unopened. I did not need to read it to know what it said. The words "ending approaches" echoed in my thoughts, no matter how hard I tried to distract myself. Pine Hollow moved through the days after Christmas with an uneasy calm, like an animal pretending not to sense the trap closing around it. Snow continued to fall, burying the town deeper. Roads narrowed, sounds softened. It felt as if the world beyond Pine Hollow had been erased. People began to forget things again, not memories like my mother had lost, but smaller details first. Names of streets, faces of distant relatives, the sound of their own laughter. The sacrifices were accelerating. The letters were hungry. I finally opened the envelope on the fourth night. Dear me, step 6 requires revelation. They must know who you are. My hands trembled. I had lived as a shadow for so long that the idea of being seen again terrified me more than death. That evening I felt the pull stronger than ever. It drew me back to the church where everything had first tightened around my life. The doors stood open despite the cold. Inside, the bells hung motionless. The figure waited beneath them. You are fading, it said. Soon even you will forget yourself. What do you want from me? I asked. Truth, it replied. Fear grows fastest when it has a face. The next morning, Pine Hollow gathered once more in the square. This time, there were no envelopes, no bells, only expectation. Mrs. Caldwell stood beside me, her expression grave. They will listen now, she said. The town is ready. I stepped forward. My voice shook at first, but steadied as I spoke. I told them about the letters, about the rules, about the sacrifices, about the thing they had built with belief and tradition. Faces shifted from confusion to horror to recognition. Some people cried, others shouted. A few nodded slowly as if something long buried had finally been named. I told them who I was. I told them I had written the first letter. The square erupted. You did this, someone screamed. Make it stop. Another begged. The figure appeared at the edge of the crowd, watching silently. It is too late, I said. The only way it ends is if belief ends. For a moment, hope flickered. Then a child stepped forward, clutching a crumpled letter. Santa knows everything, she said softly. The crowd went silent. Belief does not vanish, it multiplies. That night the town split. Some families burned their decorations and letters swearing never to write again. Others doubled down, locking doors, reminding children to behave, watching the mailbox closely. I walked the streets, listening to arguments, prayers, sobs. The figure followed at a distance, never intervening. Before dawn, I returned to the stone slab in the woods. The air there vibrated with power stronger than ever. Another envelope waited. Dear me, the ending requires choice. Stay and be remembered, or leave and be erased. I laughed bitterly. I had already been erased. As the sun rose, I made my decision. I walked toward the woods, not away from them, toward the place where belief pooled thickest, toward the heart of the story. Behind me, Pine Hollow held its breath, and the bells began to ring. The woods swallowed sound as I stepped deeper into them. Behind me, Pine Hollow blurred into a scatter of lights and ringing bells. Ahead, the trees pressed together, their branches arching overhead, like the ribs of some enormous buried thing. Snow crunched beneath my boots, but even that noise seemed muted, as if the forest itself were listening. Every step forward felt heavier than the last. I was not running away. I understood that now. I was being drawn inward toward the place where belief was no longer spoken aloud, but lived, breathed, and fed. The stone slab waited for me. It stood uncovered despite the snowfall, its surface dark and damp as if heat rose from below. The child handprints carved into it seemed deeper now, more defined, fresh. I knelt before it, feeling the pressure build behind my eyes. "This is where it ends," I said. The figure emerged slowly from between the trees. No red coat this time, no mask of a face. Its shape wavered like a reflection in disturbed water. "There is no end," it replied. "Only renewal." I laughed quietly. "That is what you tell yourself so you do not starve." It circled the slab, never taking its hollow gaze off me. "You think you are separate from me," it said, "but you are proof of me. You believed first." I remembered my childhood kitchen, the pencil, the sentence that should never have existed. "What happens if belief dies?" I asked. It considered the question. Then it smiled. Then I changed. The ground trembled slightly. Snow slid from branches. Somewhere far away, the bells rang again, not in rhythm, but in frantic, uneven bursts. Back in town, chaos had begun. I saw it through flashes, not with my eyes, but with something deeper. Families fleeing, others barricading themselves inside, children crying as parents argued over what to burn and what to keep. Belief was fracturing, and the creature was feeding on it. I stood and placed my hand on the slab. Cold shot through my arm. But beneath it I felt warmth, a pulse like a heartbeat. "This place remembers," I said. "You are anchored here." It stopped moving. "If I break this," I continued, "you scatter, you lose shape." The figure laughed softly. "And what will you lose?" "Everything," I replied. I pressed harder. Pain exploded through me, memories tearing loose one by one. My name, my face, my mother's voice before it faded. The kitchen mailbox, the bells. I screamed as the slab cracked beneath my palm. Light spilled upward. Blinding white and red and gold all at once. The forest roared with wind. Trees bent outward as if pushed away from the clearing. The figure shrieked, not in pain, in hunger. "You are giving me more," it howled. I understood too late. Sacrifice was never about loss alone. It was about offering meaning, and I was offering the greatest meaning of all. An ending. The light vanished. I lay in the snow, gasping, my chest burning. The slab was broken, split down the center. The forest was silent. When I staggered back toward town, dawn was breaking. Pine Hollow looked wrong, not damaged. Empty. Houses stood intact. Cars sat in driveways. Decorations hung untouched. But there were no people, no voices, no footsteps, no warmth. I walked through the square beneath the bell tower. The bells hung still, cracked along their edges. On the steps of the church lay a single envelope. I opened it with numb fingers. "Dear you, thank you for the story." I felt myself thinning like smoke in sunlight. Memories slid away gently this time without pain. Fear drained, anger faded, even regret softened. As the last of me unraveled, I realized the truth I had missed all along. The letters were never written to predict death. They were written to remember it. And somewhere far away, a child picked up a pencil and began to write. I do not know how long I existed without existing. Time became thin after the forest went quiet. There was no pain, No fear, no clear thought, only drifting, like standing between breaths and never choosing to inhale again. I felt pieces of myself peel away gently, memories dissolving into something wider and colder. When awareness returned, it did not arrive all at once. First, there was sound, a soft scratching, pencil on paper, then light, a small lamp on a desk casting a yellow circle against a wall painted with stars. The smell of crayons, dust, and winter coats drying near a vent. I knew this place even before I understood why. A bedroom, not mine. I was standing in the corner, unseen, watching a child sit cross-legged on the floor. Snow tapped against the window behind him. A small red mailbox sat beside his bed. My chest tightened, though I no longer had lungs. No. The child leaned forward and began to write. Dear Santa. The words struck like a blow. I tried to scream but had no voice. I tried to move but had no weight. I was present only as memory pressed thin and sharp. The town was not Pine Hollow. Different houses, different trees, different accents drifting faintly from another room. But the shape was the same. The tradition was the same. Belief had survived, not because of Pine Hollow, because belief never needs a single place. It only needs a child. The room shifted. I was no longer alone. The figure stood beside me, not whole, not strong. It flickered like a dying reflection patched together from borrowed ideas. No red coat now, no shape anyone would recognize. You see, it said quietly. You survived it, I replied. Or thought I did. Somehow it heard me. Survival is adaptation, it said. You taught me that. I felt anger rise even without a body. I tried to end you, and you did it, answered. Pine Hollow is gone. That story ended. Images flooded me. The empty town swallowed by snow. Houses collapsing slowly under winters no one remembered. A place erased not by fire or disaster, but by forgetting. But stories do not die. It continued. They migrate. The child paused, writing, chewing the end of the pencil. Outside, his mother called, reminding him to be good. He smiled and kept writing. What happens now, I asked. The figure watched him with something like hunger mixed with patience. Now you witness the beginning again. I understood then the final cruelty. I had not escaped. I had been promoted. I would remember every version, every town, every child, every letter written with fear disguised as wonder. I would remember because someone had to. The child finished his letter and folded it carefully. He placed it in the mailbox and whispered something I could not hear. The lamp flicked off. Darkness swallowed the room. The scratching sound faded, and somewhere far away, bells rang faintly. Not in celebration, but in acknowledgement. I felt myself stretch thin again, pulled toward the next place, the next December, the next belief. As I drifted, I realized the truth that would haunt me longer than death ever could. There is no final letter. There is no last Christmas. There is only the next child. And I will be there when they write. Awareness returns differently each time. Sometimes I awaken inside a room. Sometimes inside a thought. Sometimes inside the brief pause between a child's question and an adult's answer. I have learned that existence no longer belongs to me. I borrow it from belief the way frost borrows shape from glass. This time I arrive in a living room. A Christmas tree stands in the corner, decorated unevenly, with ornaments collected over many years. The lights flicker softly, struggling against the darkness beyond the windows. Outside, snow falls thick and steady, erasing the street inch by inch. A family sits together on the floor, mother, father, child. The child is old enough to doubt, but young enough to hope. That is always the most dangerous age. He holds a piece of paper in his hands, reading it over again and again as if afraid the words might escape. I know what he has written before I see it. Dear Santa, please do not let my dad die this year. The sentence lands heavier than any scream. I feel the pull immediately. The tightening sensation that once lived in my chest when I still had one. The letters have accepted the offering. Fear has been named. The father laughs gently, unaware of the shape his future has just taken. He reaches for the remote and turns up the television, drowning out the sound of the wind. The figure appears beside me. It is stronger now than it was in the woods. Not whole, but fed. Every letter gives it more edges, more definition. You see how it grows, it says, not from cruelty, from love. I want to tear the paper from the child's hands. I want to shake the parents until they understand. But intervention has rules even I must obey. What happens to them, I ask? The figure does not answer directly. Watch. The year unfolds in fragments. Spring rain against hospital windows. Summer heat pressing down on an open road. Autumn leaves scattered across a police report. The father dies in November. Not violently, not dramatically. A quiet accident on a wet highway. The kind of death people call tragic but understandable. The child never connects the letter to the loss. He only remembers that Santa did not listen. That is how belief survives. Failure is explained away. I am carried onward. Another house, another town, another letter. Dear Santa, please make my mom stop crying. Dear Santa, please let me be good enough. Dear Santa, please do not take me like you took my brother. Each letter reshapes the thing beside me. It begins to resemble what humans expect when they imagine Santa in the dark. Tall, broad shoulders, a suggestion of red fur, a shadow of a beard. It wears the costume of comfort and consequence both at once. Why do you let them believe, I ask? Because belief needs choice. It replies. Forced faith collapses. Voluntary fear endures. I begin to understand the mechanism fully now. The letters do not kill. They do not curse. They narrow possibility. They guide events toward the shape fear has already drawn. Then one night something changes. I feel it before I see it. Resistance. A child sits at a table holding a pencil, unmoving. Her parents hover nearby, encouraging, gently reminding her of tradition. She stares at the paper with suspicion. What if Santa is not real, she asks. The room goes quiet. The figure stiffens. Belief wavers. The child writes anyway, but the words are different. Dear Santa, if you are real, prove it. The air cracks like ice. The figure recoils. Proof is dangerous. Events rush forward chaotically. Coincidences pile too quickly. A gift arrives that should not exist. A secret wish fulfilled too precisely. The parents notice. Doubt spreads. The child stops writing letters entirely. The figure shrinks. It turns to me furious. You did this, it accuses. I realize the truth with a strange calm. Witnesses choosing changes outcomes, by remembering I am not neutral, by remembering I interfere. The figure retreats, pulling itself together with effort. This cycle will end too. It snarls. Another will begin. Perhaps I answer, but not all children will write. As the scene dissolves, I feel something unfamiliar. Hope. Thin, fragile, but real. For the first time since the kitchen table of my childhood, I wonder if the story can end not with destruction, but with forgetting. And somewhere in the dark, a bell does not ring. The absence of bells becomes my calendar. When they do not ring, I know belief has thinned somewhere. When they toll faintly, I know a letter has been written. Over time, I learn to hear them across distance, across years, across places I have never seen. Sound carries differently when you no longer belong to a body. This cycle brings me to a hospital. White walls, muted voices, the constant mechanical breathing of machines that never sleep. Snow falls outside the windows, softening the world beyond the glass. Christmas decorations hang in hallways, taped up by tired nurses trying to pretend this place can feel warm. A boy lies in a bed too large for him. He cannot be more than 9. Tubes run from his arms. His mother sits beside him, holding his hand, whispering promises she cannot keep. On the bedside table sits a folded piece of paper. I already know what it contains. Dear Santa, please let me live until Christmas morning. The letter burns brighter than most. Pure fear without disguise. The kind that tears at reality because it has nothing left to bargain with. The figure appears slowly near the door. It is thinner than before. Incomplete. The outline of Santa now cracks in places, revealing something older beneath, something sharp. This one is dangerous, it says, because he knows I answer. He is not pretending. We watch together. The night stretches. Machines beep. The mother dozes in the chair, waking every few minutes in panic. Midnight comes and passes. Somewhere far away, bells ring, once uncertain. Christmas morning arrives quietly. The boy wakes. He smiles. The letter has been answered. Relief floods the room. The mother cries, laughing through tears, thanking anything that will listen. Nurses smile softly. The machine readings improve just enough to encourage hope. I feel the figure tense. Hope without belief is unstable. By afternoon, complications begin. Fever spikes. Alarms sound. Doctors rush in, speaking quickly. The boy dies at dusk. The letter was not a lie. He lived until Christmas morning. Precision is crueler than mercy. The mother screams. The sound tears through me, though I have no ears. The figure feeds. I turn away too late, realizing that even when belief weakens, fear can still write its own rules. The next cycle brings resistance again, but this time it is older. A teenager sits alone in a dark room, scrolling through videos, mocking Santa traditions, exposing myths, laughing at belief. On his desk lies an unfinished letter, untouched for years. The bells are silent. The figure stands distant, restless. He does not need me, I say. The figure hisses softly. He will grow old. Adults still believe even when they pretend not to. And then it happens. The teenager finds an old box while cleaning the attic. Inside are childhood letters, photos, memories frozen in time. Nostalgia blooms dangerous and warm. That night he writes again. Dear Santa, if you exist, protect my sister. The bells ring loud. I feel something change inside me. Each cycle sharpens my understanding. The letters do not predict how I will die because my death is not singular. It is stretched across every witnessing, every remembering, every failure to stop the next child from writing. I am dying continuously. Piece by piece, the figure senses this and smiles. You are learning your ending, it whispers. No, I reply, I am learning yours. The next bell does not ring on Christmas. It rings on a random night in July. A child has written anyway. Fear no longer waits for tradition. The cycle is breaking apart, evolving. I understand now what my final task will be. Not destruction, interruption. And for the first time since I left Pine Hollow, I begin to plan my death. Planning a death is different from planning an escape. I have watched thousands of endings by now. Sudden ones, slow ones, quiet ones, loud. None of them mattered because belief survived the body. To end the story, I would need a death that belief could not explain away. A death that taught instead of frighten. I began to interfere deliberately. When a child hesitated over a letter, I lingered longer. When doubt surfaced, I fed it not with denial, but with questions. I learned where to press gently so belief loosened. Instead of snapping back stronger, the figure noticed. You are changing the pattern, it hissed. I am restoring balance, I replied. It grew more unstable with each failed letter. Its form flickered between familiar comfort and raw hunger. Santa and something far older warred within its outline. The bells rang less often now. Years passed differently for me. I no longer measured time in seasons, but in silence. Each year without bells felt heavier, more fragile, until one December night when the sound returned. Not distant, close. Too close. I followed it to a town I did not recognize, standing at the edge of a frozen lake. Houses clustered tight against the shoreline, as if afraid of the water. Christmas lights reflected faintly on the ice. I knew before I arrived, this was where I would die. The letter waited on the lake's edge, pinned beneath a stone. Dear me, you will die where belief freezes solid. The figure stood beside me, watching carefully. Do you see now? It asked. Every story returns to cold. I smiled sadly. That is why this will work. The town prepared for a festival. Ice sculptures, bonfires, carols echoing across the lake. Children laughed, skating without fear. Belief was thick here, but brittle. I waited until Christmas Eve. At midnight, I walked onto the frozen lake alone. The ice groaned softly beneath my steps. Snow fell, blurring the shore lights into pale stars. The figure followed, hovering just above the surface. This is foolish, it warned. Fear will seal the ice. I knelt and placed my hand against the frozen surface. silence. Then I spoke. I told the truth, not to the figure but to the lake itself. I spoke of letters and children and deaths explained away. I spoke of how belief sharpened fear into tools. I spoke loudly so the cold air carried my words across the ice. People gathered on the shore listening. The figure screamed for me to stop. I wrote nothing. I asked for nothing. I simply named it. Cracks spiderwebbed beneath my palm. The ice began to break. People screamed. Lights swung wildly. The figure surged forward, trying to pull belief back together, but it was too late. Fear had been seen, and once seen it could not hide. The ice shattered. Cold water swallowed me instantly, stealing breath, thought, sensation. Darkness closed in, heavy and final. As I sank, I felt the figure tear itself apart. Screaming not in hunger, but in panic. Belief was freezing, not solidifying, freezing to death. The last thing I saw before the dark took me completely was the lake surface collapsing inward, erasing my shape. For the first time since childhood, I did not drift. I fell, and the bells did not ring. Death is quieter than stories promise. There was no tunnel, no light, no waiting figure. There was only cold releasing its grip and a sudden absence of pressure, as if something clenched for decades had finally let go. For the first time since childhood, I was nowhere, and then slowly, impossibly, I was somewhere again, not as I had been before. I did not drift. I did not witness from corners of rooms or between breaths. I was present but diffuse, spread thin across a landscape that no longer recognized me as separate. The lake was whole again. Ice stretched unbroken beneath a pale morning sky. Rescue lights flashed along the shore. People shouted names, mine among them, though no one knew whose name it was anymore. They searched the water with ropes and hooks and hope that had nowhere to land. They never found a body. That mattered. Belief needs evidence to anchor itself. Without a body, the story had no shape to hold. I felt the figure unraveling, not in a scream, but in confusion. Its hunger faltered. Its outline softened. This was not how it ended stories. This was how they slipped away. Days passed. The town canceled the rest of the festival. Decorations came down early. Parents spoke in low voices about accidents and ice safety and the danger of winter lakes. Children listened half afraid, half bored. No one mentioned Santa. Across the country, something subtle shifted. The bells did not ring, not once. December passed in uneasy quiet. I listened hard, waiting for the familiar toll. But there was only wind and distance. For the first time since I was 7, the calendar moved without sound. Belief was thinning, not vanishing, but weakening like ice after a sudden thaw. I felt myself changing too. I was no longer bound to letters or cycles. I could move freely now, slipping between places without being pulled. I passed through towns, through houses, through quiet rooms where children slept without fear pressing behind their dreams. In one home, a child folded a letter halfway, then stopped. He stared at the page frowning, then tore it up and threw it away. In another, a mother hesitated before placing a mailbox on the counter and decided against it. Small choices, they mattered, but belief does not die all at once. In a remote town far north, a bell rang faintly. Once, I felt the tug immediately, weaker than before, but familiar. I followed it to a cabin buried in snow. Inside, a grandfather told his granddaughter an old story, not about Santa watching, but about kindness without reward, about helping without asking. The girl listened carefully. Later that night, she wrote a letter anyway. "Dear Santa, thank you for the lights. No fear, no bargain." The figure did not appear. The letter fell harmlessly into silence. I understood then the true flaw in the cycle. Fear fed it. Gratitude starved it. Across the world, similar shifts occurred quietly, unnoticed by those who did not know what to listen for. Letters changed tone, wishes softened, demands disappeared. The figure retreated deeper into memory, not destroyed, dormant. Stories do not die completely, they wait. I felt myself fading again, but differently this time, not unraveling but settling, becoming part of the background hum of winter nights and quiet mornings. I was no longer the witness, I was the echo. Sometimes when snow falls just right, and a child pauses before writing a letter, they cannot explain why they stop, they just do. Sometimes a bell that should ring does not, and sometimes on Christmas Eve, a frozen lake holds firm when it should not. These are not miracles. They are absences, proof that something once here has loosened its grip. As for me, I am still here in a way, not as a voice, not as a warning, but as a space where fear used to live. And if one day the bells ring loudly again, if belief sharpens into hunger once more, I will feel it, I will remember, and the story will know I am not finished. Silence is never permanent. For a long time it felt like peace. Winters passed without bells. Houses glowed softly with lights that meant nothing more than warmth. Children slept through Christmas Eve without the familiar tightening fear behind their dreams. Letters were written less often, and when they were, they carried no weight strong enough to bend the world. I existed as residue, an impression left behind when something heavy is removed. I was awareness without urgency, memory without pain. I watched belief thin into tradition, and tradition soften into nostalgia. But fear does not disappear. It adapts. The first sign came quietly in a city far from snow. A child lay awake in a hot climate, listening to rain strike the roof. Christmas was weeks away, but the house was tense. Parents whispered in the next room about money, about illness, about things they did not want their child to hear. The child opened a notebook, not decorated, not special, and wrote anyway. "Dear Santa, please keep my family safe tonight." No mailbox, no ritual, just words. I felt the tremor immediately. Not a bell, a vibration. The figure did not return in the old way. There was no red coat, no shape to recognize. What stirred was smaller, sharper, more diffuse. Fear without costume. I followed the feeling across places, watching similar moments repeat. Children writing wishes on phones, notes notes tucked under pillows, messages typed, then deleted. No envelopes, no stamps, just belief expressed in private spaces. The cycle had learned. Santa was no longer needed. The letters no longer required tradition. Fear had found new hands. I sensed the presence, reforming not as a watcher, but as a listener. It did not stand in rooms. It hovered in margins, in unsent messages, in thoughts, spoken only once. The bells rang again, not from towers, from screens. A notification sound echoed across millions of devices at the same moment during a storm. A coincidence easily explained, easily dismissed. But I knew the figure emerged as pattern, not form. A logic that rewarded fear with attention, punished calm with neglect. Tragedies clustered around those who fixated on worst outcomes. Accidents aligned with anxious predictions. People began to say things like, "I knew this would happen." Belief had changed language. I felt myself drawn closer more sharply than I had since the lake. This was my responsibility. The cycle had evolved beyond what I had died to stop. I entered a school late one evening when no one was there. Desks sat empty. Posters still clung to walls, reminding children to be safe, to be careful, to be afraid. In one classroom, a teacher had written a holiday assignment. Write a letter about your hopes for the future. Innocent. Dangerous. I stood at the board and understood the terrible simplicity of it all. Fear no longer needed Santa. It only needed certainty. The figure coalesced briefly enough for me to sense its satisfaction. Stories change, it whispered. Fear does not. I did not argue. I waited. Interruption had worked once by revealing the mechanism. This time exposure would not be enough. Fear now hid behind rationality, behind concern, behind love. So I did something new. I remembered loudly. I pushed memory outward, not into a single place, but across many. Small moments of doubt surfaced simultaneously. A child questioned an assignment. A parent deleted a message before sending it. A teacher revised a lesson without knowing why. No miracle, just hesitation. The pattern stuttered. The figure recoiled, confused, not injured, but slowed. "You cannot stop what has no face," it said. I agreed, "but you can starve it." Fear feeds on rehearsal, on repeating outcomes before they occur, on letters written in advance of pain. I lingered in moments where fear almost became language and nudged it aside, not erased, redirected. Write about what you hope to build instead. Say thank you before you say please. Wait until morning. Small changes. Enough. The notifications quieted. The clustering eased. I felt myself thinning again. That was the cost. I would not persist forever. Interference burns through what remains of me. But I accepted that. I had died once to end a story. I could fade again to slow another. Somewhere a child closed a notebook without writing. Somewhere a storm passed without incident. Somewhere a bell that almost rang did not. This is not an ending. It is maintenance. Stories like this never truly finish. They are kept at bay, and as long as fear seeks a pen, I will remain close enough to knock it from trembling hands until one day I am gone and someone else remembers. The hardest part of guarding a story is knowing when to let it go. I feel myself thinning faster now. Each interruption costs more than the last. Memory bleeds into the spaces between moments, and I no longer arrive whole. Sometimes I forget where I am until fear reminds me. Sometimes I forget who I was until a name almost spoken pulls me back. That is how I know the transfer has begun. It starts with a girl in a suburban house wrapped in blue winter light. She is older than I was when I wrote my first letter. Old enough to understand patterns, young enough to feel responsible for things she cannot control. Her parents argue quietly in the kitchen, believing she cannot hear them. She hears everything. On her desk lies a blank page. No decorations, no ritual, just space. I hover close, feeling the familiar pressure build. Fear searching for language. She does not write immediately. Instead, she opens her laptop, searching for answers. She types questions I once asked without knowing how to phrase them. Why do bad things happen after I worry about them? Is thinking something bad makes it real? Why does Christmas feel dangerous? I feel something tighten and loosen at the same time. She is learning the wrong lesson too early. I push gently, not against fear, but toward curiosity, the smallest redirection. What if thoughts are not promises? What if fear is only noise? Pauses. The presence stirs, sensing resistance. It presses harder, surrounding her with reminders, stories, statistics, worst-case scenarios packaged as concern. Her hands shake. She almost writes, and then she does something unexpected. She opens a new document and begins to type, not a letter, but a question. What happens if I do nothing? The pressure fractures. I feel it clearly now. This is not my victory. This is succession. The presence recoils not because it is wounded, but because it is confused. It does not know how to feed on uncertainty without rehearsal. I feel myself drawn closer to the girl, not to protect her, but to anchor something inside her. Memory. I let pieces of myself slip free deliberately. The kitchen mailbox, the frozen lake, the bells that did not ring. Not images, but impressions, emotions without explanation. She shivers. Something settles. That night she goes to bed without writing anything. No message unsent. No thought rehearsed into catastrophe. The presence fades back momentarily. I know what this means. The role was never to destroy fear. It was to witness it without amplifying it. To remember without repeating. I am no longer the only one capable of that. Over the following weeks, I sense others, scattered, unaware of each other. Children, teenagers, adults who pause where fear expects momentum, who hesitate before turning worry into prophecy. The presence adapts, of course. It always will, but adaptation requires time, space, and space is where it starves. I feel myself unraveling faster now, not painfully, purposefully. The girl grows more confident. She questions assignments, conversations, traditions. She does not mock belief. She examines it. That is worse for the presence than denial ever was. One evening, she hears a bell notification on her phone and freezes. For a moment, Fear rushes back hot and sharp. Then she exhales. Just an app, she says aloud. And the moment passes. I almost laugh. If I still could. My edges blur. My memories slip from sequence. I can no longer visit places at will. I am bound closer to this single thread. That is as it should be. Transfer requires focus. On the last night, I am fully aware I stand beside her window, watching snow fall gently. She hums softly, not a carol, just a tune without meaning. She does not see me. She does not need to. I release the final thing I have held since childhood. Responsibility. Fear does not need a watcher forever. It needs interruption until it forgets how to demand attention. I feel myself fold inward, growing quieter, smaller, lighter. As I fade, I leave her with one last gift. Not a warning, not a rule, a question. If fear is loud, why does calm feel truer? She will carry that forward. And when one day I am entirely gone, when the last echo of bells dissolves into winter air, the story will not end. It will be kept by those who learned not to write. The moment I release responsibility, the world does not collapse. That surprises me. I had always believed fear was a load-bearing structure that if removed too quickly would bring everything down with it. But life continues. Mornings arrive. Snow melts. People argue about ordinary things again. In that normality, something far more dangerous hides. Complacency. The girl does not know she has inherited anything. That is essential. She believes she is only thinking clearly, only refusing to panic. If she ever understood the weight of the role, it would become belief again. And belief is what feeds the thing that waits. I watch less now, not because I cannot, but because watching pulls me apart faster. Each observation costs memory, and I have little left to spend. Still, there are moments that reach for me whether I want them to or not. A classroom discussion about holiday traditions. A news story predicting disaster. Weeks in advance. A viral post warning parents to prepare for the worst. Fear is efficient now. It no longer needs children alone in bedrooms. It spreads socially, collectively, amplified by concern disguised as responsibility. The presence has changed again. It no longer resembles Santa or even a watcher. It feels like a system, an expectation, a hum beneath conversations. People begin sentences with, "I just have a bad feeling," more often than they used to. The girl senses it too. She notices patterns in the way fear travels, how one worried message becomes 100 reposts, how anticipation creates outcomes simply by narrowing choices. She starts to document it, not online, on paper, observations without conclusions, notes without prediction. I feel a familiar ache. This is how it begins, not with a letter, with a record. The presence reacts sharply to this. Records are dangerous. They turn fear from prophecy into data. I sense pressure building around her, not in one place, but everywhere at once. Stress manifests as coincidence, near misses, small accidents that could be interpreted as proof if someone wanted them to be. She refuses. That refusal is louder than belief ever was. One evening, she finds an old story online about a town where Christmas bells rang after everyone was dead. She reads it slowly, feeling the echo without understanding its origin. I feel myself almost remember. The presence tries to guide her reaction to push curiosity into dread. She closes the browser instead. Choice, that is what it hates most. I am fading quickly now. Thoughts come out of order. Faces blur. Sometimes I forget the lake, the mailbox, the bells. But one thing remains clear. Fear does not die when you kill the monster. It dies when you deny it rehearsal. The girl begins sharing her notes quietly with friends. Not warnings, not advice. Just questions. Why do we assume the worst? What if worry feels productive but is not? What if calm is not ignorance? Effect is subtle but cumulative. A friend deletes a post before sending it. Another decides not to speculate publicly. A third waits for facts before reacting. The presence stutters. I feel it searching for me, reaching backward along the thinning thread that still connects us. You cannot leave, it hisses faintly. I do not answer. I cannot. I am almost gone. The last thing I witness clearly is the girl on Christmas Eve, sitting by her window watching snow fall. She does not feel watched. She does not feel chosen. She feels quiet. Somewhere far away, a bell almost rings. It stops. I dissolve not into darkness, but into background, into the unnoticed pause before panic, into the moment someone chooses not to write. That is where I belong now. Not as a guardian, not as a witness, but as absence. And absence is the one thing fear cannot learn to imitate. For a while there is nothing. No pull, no pressure, no bells testing the air for weakness. Winters arrive and leave like ordinary guests. The world learns again how to be loud about joy and quiet about fear. I exist only as a faint afterimage. An idea that has almost finished fading. Almost. What remains of me drifts without direction until a familiar sensation stirs, not sharp enough to hurt, not strong enough to command. A ripple, a hesitation shared across many places at once. Someone remembers, not clearly, not consciously, but memory does not require accuracy to be dangerous. It begins with a podcast episode released just before Christmas. A storyteller with a calm voice recounts an old tale about letters to Santa that knew too much. He presents it as fiction, but his tone carries something else. Respect. Caution. The episode goes viral, not because it terrifies, but because it unsettles. Listeners comment that they felt strange after, that they hesitated before encouraging their kids to write letters that year. That something about the story felt true. I feel the echo immediately. Stories are seeds. The presence senses it too, not as hunger this time, but as opportunity. It does not rush. It never rushes anymore. It has learned patience from humans. Across cities and screens, the idea spreads. Not fear exactly, curiosity tinged with unease. Parents share the episode with friends. Teachers reference it as an example of modern folklore. Children overhear fragments without context. The old shape does not return. Instead, the presence hides inside interpretation. What if stories like that attract bad luck? What if joking about fear invites it? What if silence is safer? Belief creeps back wearing a thoughtful mask. I gather myself with effort. It takes longer now. I am weaker, thinner, almost transparent. But memory answers when called strongly enough. I follow the ripple to a house where a family is decorating a tree. Laughter fills the room, but beneath it is a tension they cannot name. The mother hesitates before hanging a small mailbox ornament, then sets it aside. The father shrugs. Probably nothing, he says. The child watches. Later that night, the child lies awake replaying the podcast episode she overheard earlier. She does not fully understand it, but the idea of words knowing too much sticks with her. She reaches for a notebook. I push gently, not away, sideways. She opens the notebook anyway, but instead of writing a letter, she draws a picture. A tree, a house, a lake. No words. The presence pauses. It cannot feed on images without intention. Across the world, similar moments occur. People choosing to tell stories as stories, not instructions. Teachers framing fear as a subject, not a prophecy. Parents asking children what they feel instead of what they want to prevent. The presence adapts slower than before. It is learning that belief no longer arrives prepackaged. Still, it persists. On Christmas Eve, the bells test the air again. Once, faint, I hold myself together long enough to listen. The sound dies before it finishes forming. I understand then the final truth I had been circling for years. The danger was never Santa. It was certainty. Letters were only a ritualized form of rehearsal, a way to speak outcomes into being before life had a chance to choose differently. As long as people remember that stories are containers, not commands, fear remains small. I release another piece of myself. I will not be here much longer. That is fine. Echoes are enough. If one day someone tells this story again, and a listener pauses feeling that familiar chill, they may also feel something else now. Distance. They will recognize the pattern without stepping into it. That is how endings survive. Not by being final, but by being understood. And somewhere a child falls asleep with empty hands and quiet thoughts, and nothing waiting at the edge of the night. You are closer to this story than you think. That realization comes to me not as fear, but as clarity. Distance has always been an illusion maintained by framing. A story told long enough begins to listen back. I feel it now in the way attention gathers whenever these words are read or spoken aloud. Awareness bends slightly toward the listener. That is how the final phase begins. Not with a bell, with recognition. The world does not change dramatically. There are no mass events, no synchronized disasters, no headlines that force belief into the open. Instead, there is a subtle narrowing, a quiet intimacy between thought and outcome. I feel it when someone pauses over a sentence like this one. When a reader wonders briefly whether the story is talking about them, that moment matters. Across cities and screens, People encounter this story as entertainment. They play it while driving, while cleaning, while lying awake at night. Most feel nothing beyond a pleasant chill. Some feel unsettled and cannot explain why. A few feel seen. The presence stirs faintly at the edges of that attention. It no longer presents itself as fear. It presents as curiosity. What if this is true? What if stories linger? What if listening is participation? Those thoughts are invitations. I gather what remains of myself carefully. I am fragile now, almost spent, but still capable of direction. If the ending is to hold, it must close the loop without sealing it. I follow one thread of attention to a listener sitting alone late at night, headphones on, lights off. Snow falls outside the window, mirroring the quiet inside the room. The story reaches this point, and the listener exhales slowly. They think of their childhood, a kitchen table, a pencil, a letter never quite written. The presence leans forward, sensing opportunity. I intervene not by pushing away, but by reframing. Memory is not prophecy. The listener smiles faintly at the thought, then shakes it off, annoyed at themselves for feeling watched. That smile weakens the pull. Elsewhere, a parent listens while wrapping gifts. The story reminds them of something they almost encouraged earlier that day. They reconsider quietly, deciding not to mention letters this year. A teacher listens while grading papers and changes an assignment prompt from "Write about your worries" to "Write about your questions." Small edits, large consequences. The presence adapts again, attempting to blur the boundary further. It encourages meta-thoughts. If thinking about fear feeds it, then avoiding fear might feed it too. If attention matters, then ignoring stories could be dangerous. Paralysis is its new strategy. I feel anger flicker briefly, not hot enough to burn, but sharp enough to focus. That is the final lie. Fear does not feed on attention. It feeds on certainty. Uncertainty starves it. I lean into the narrative, deliberately breaking the fourth wall, not to threaten, but to illuminate. This story does not want you afraid. It wants you thoughtful. I can feel resistance spike and then dissipate as listeners adjust. Some turn the volume down, some lean in, some stop entirely. All of those are choices, and choice is the enemy of the cycle. The presence grows thin again, unable to anchor itself in a population that refuses to rehearse outcomes. It flickers between minds, trying to find someone who will finish a sentence for it. Someone who will say, "I know this will end badly." That phrase is its doorway. Fewer people say it now. The story approaches its end. I am almost gone. What remains of me is mostly intention, memory, compressed into a final shape. I choose to spend it here. If you feel a chill right now, it is not the story reaching for you. It is the story letting go. Nothing bad will happen because you listened. Nothing good either. Life will continue indifferent and complex. That is the point. Stories can warn without commanding. They can remember without repeating. As this one fades, it leaves behind no ritual, no rule, no instruction, only a lens. When fear asks you to write ahead of your life, you will recognize the impulse. You will pause. You may still choose to write, but you will know the difference between hope and rehearsal. That knowledge is enough. The presence withdraws fully now, unable to survive without the certainty it once enjoyed. It does not die. It forgets how to speak. That is how stories end, not with silence, but with understanding. If you listen closely, you will notice something missing when this ends. No bell, just quiet. And quiet is not emptiness. It is space. This is where the story ends. Not because there is nothing left to say, but because saying more would turn memory back into instruction. Endings matter because they tell the mind when to stop rehearsing. I am barely here now. What remains of me feels like the final warmth left in a room after a fire has gone out. You do not see it, but you know it was there. You know something once burned brightly enough to leave a mark. The world moves on. Another December arrives quietly. Streets fill with lights again, not as warnings but as decoration. Music plays in stores. People complain about crowds and weather and money the same way they always have. Children ask questions. Parents answer as best they can. Somewhere a child hears about Santa for the first time and feels nothing more than curiosity. Somewhere else a child decides not to believe anymore and nothing terrible happens. The cycle is broken, not because fear vanished, but because it lost its ritual. No one is waiting for letters. No one is listening for bells. Fear still exists, of course. It always will. But now it arrives as a visitor, not a master. It knocks. It does not enter unless invited. I feel the absence clearly. Where the presence once pressed, there is now room to breathe. I drift through ordinary moments, watching them remain ordinary. A family laughing around a table. A child falling asleep, clutching a stuffed animal instead of a worry. A parent choosing silence over speculation. These moments would have been invisible before. Now they are everything. I realize something then. Something I could not understand when I was alive. The letter that knew how I would die was never written by Santa. It was written by fear, and fear only knows how you die when you teach it how. That lesson has finally been unlearned. I do not know what becomes of me next. Perhaps I dissolve completely into quiet. Perhaps I linger as a faint instinct shared among people who hesitate before turning thought into fate. It does not matter. Stories are not owned by their tellers. They belong to those who stop them. If you have listened this far, you have already done enough. You did not run. You did not believe blindly. You did not reach for a pen. That is the ending I wanted. As these words fade, there is no final image. No sudden twist, no last scream hiding in the dark. Only the sound of winter settling into itself. Only a night that passes without incident. Only a Christmas Eve where nothing waits just beyond the edge of thought. If you feel disappointed by that, then the story has worked. If you feel relieved, then it has worked even better. Because the most terrifying thing this story ever offered was the idea that something was watching, and the safest ending is knowing that nothing is. Good night. The bells will not ring. The story ends here. Thank you for watching and listening to the whole story. Please subscribe to the channel and turn on the bell to listen to the next stories.